the Pope's visit to the U.S.
Yep.
Now, it isn't his first visit, but it's his first visit as a Pope.
As a Pope, right?
Yeah. And it's brought up a lot of issues regarding the Catholic Church in America. And there's these statistics that found that 36% of younger Catholics attend Mass at least once a month, compared to 64% of the older generation. And 68% of all Catholics surveyed said that they agreed that they believed they could be in good standing with the church without going to weekly Mass. That's a lot. That's 68%. Even though Catholics, like in the previous statistic,
Even though they do go.
at least once a week.
Yeah, they
At least
have
once
to
a week.
go.
Like 36% of younger Catholics go at least once a week.
Okay.
68% of all Catholics believe that they can be in good standing with the church without going to weekly Mass. Isn't that something?
Well, I remember the question used to be put, do you have to go to church? Do you have to go to church to be a Christian?
And that is the building with the services.
Building and the services.
Yeah,
And that's the same question here, isn't it?
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think in the Catholic Church, though, when they have the Mass, that's considered an act of grace. It's like a dispenser of grace. And so by going, God's favor, God's grace is bestowed upon you. And that even the communion, which you'd go, the Mass, being the cup and the bread, is somehow, if I use the word magical, I probably will offend, won't I?
I used that term one time.
Yeah, it offends. But it's somehow turned into the actual body and blood of Christ. So in order to take on Christ, you have got to attend Mass.
So for somebody to say, I don't believe that, isn't that what some people are saying?
Well, how can you be in good standing as a Catholic, a Roman Catholic, and not attend Mass where those essentials, I would think, happen? And I would think that a Catholic priest would agree with that. That
you need to be there.
you need to be there because the Mass is central. The Mass is important, and particularly the Eucharist, the communion, the wafer and the bread, or the wine and the wafer.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, now, tell me if this fits in with that. Someone will ask me, do you have to go to church to be a Christian? And it's a little bit of a stretch for me to say this, but I'll say, I don't know about you, but I generally do. And what I mean by that isn't that I have to make a check, that I went to church. But I find it's pretty important for me to be with other church people. Not church people, other believers. But there's a big difference between saying, I need that connection with other believers, and saying I need to do it as a requirement to satisfy somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a big difference between I find it helpful, I find it encouraging, and I must.
Right. Well, even all that said, I would say that a Christian really does need to meet regularly with other believers. But being of the Protestant group, I do not see Mass as a bestower of grace.
Right.
Communion or the bread and the wine is a remembrance of Christ. It is not Christ. And I don't need to take communion to acquire Christ. I do it because it's a remembrance that Jesus Christ asked us to observe.
Yes.
No other thing.
Yeah, it takes us to the cross every week.
Yeah.
Even if we fail to do it during the week, somehow. Yeah.
And the other thing is that the early church met in homes. They didn't have any buildings. I think Acts, second chapter is it, third chapter is it, and they met daily, and they broke bread, house to house, house to house, broke bread. I would imagine that would be like their form of communion, and daily.
Well, I think it was like, what did they say, 350 years until you had your first church building.
Uh-huh.
And a long time before you had a communion service
Right.
that resembled anything like what we're talking about.
Yep.
Well, you know, there's two words that come to my mind. One is the idea of form and meaning. And I think that was part of the hippie movement. You know, the idea that the institution represented form, but the question is, can't I have the heart of marriage without having the form?
Oh, yeah.
You know, Glenn Campbell sang a song, Gentle on My Mind, or something like that.
Gentle on my mind.
He says, it's not the ink stains on the marriage license, it's just knowing that I can keep my sleeping bag in your house. And so that, I think that a lot of people, when they have the choice, younger people, will jump towards meaning, and maybe this is too general, but to say that older people may jump towards
A form.
the form. And so here, that's part of what I'm hearing in this report that we've read,
Yeah.
is that the meaning is more essential than the form. Is that part of it?
Yep. I think in terms of, I think both are important,
Yes.
but
yeah.
like in the Glenn Campbell, the sleeping bag has more meaning than the ink stain, but one emphasizes the other. In other words, I'm going to put in writing the ink stain, what the meaning of the sleeping bag is.
Sure.
And this is going to be part of our, neither is the total relationship, it's just part of a wonderful relationship that
Right.
I want to be life-consuming.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
I think the same way with the church. You cannot look at, or being a Christian, you cannot look at the building as being the totality of your faith,
Yeah.
but rather as a part.
So you'd say, I don't know if you'd say, I'd say, it's not going to church that you underline going, but it's being the church, right? It's being the church.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And it tips the emphasis in a different direction.
Yeah, it's the people, not the building. But yeah, I think that life as a Christian, I think the admonishment of Scripture is to not forsake the assembling of yourselves together. But it doesn't say where you need to assemble. That's
Sure.
totally open.
Good
In Solomon's porch, down by the riverside.
Louis
in
Barn,
homes,
Louis Barn
and
Grill.
Louis Barn Grill. Yep.
In Ashland, Oregon.
Yep.
Ashland, Oregon. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's
Yep.
all about definitions.
Right.